Well, the latest national polling by Leger reveals the Conservatives now ahead of the Liberals and the NDP making gains. Joining us to explain what this means and dig into some other fascinating findings is Andrew Enns, Executive Vice President with Leger. Welcome, Andrew. Welcome back. It's you come bearing gifts again today.
It sounds great. We're happy to join you, Harold. And yeah, I come bearing some new information, some new data.
Great. So can you share with us then what your latest tracking polling for Canada, your national polling, what does that tell us about how things are going,
Sure.
and maybe compared to some previous trend lines you were seeing?
So our Leger election tracking we released came out this morning, and we've got we've got some change. We've got the Conservatives now up on top. They're in at 34%, which represents a 3-point jump from a week ago when we put out some of our election tracking. The Liberals are down to 30%, so by no means out of this thing, but it does represent a drop of 3 points again from a week ago when we were in field. And the other party that's really on the move, I mean, the Conservatives to this stage look to be having a good campaign, but the other party that's actually seems to be doing well are the NDP. They're at 24%, which is a pretty good number for them nationally, and that represents from a week ago a 3-point jump. So there's definitely been some shifting of ballot support. I've referenced the Liberals losing a bit of support. I suspect some of that's come from both the right and left flanks of the Liberal Party. And then the other party that seems to be having a tough campaign right now is the Green Party. They're down to 2% of decided voters nationally, and they've led some support from over the past couple of weeks. And I venture to say some of that has gone to the NDP. So there's movement. Still early days. We've got lots of campaign left, but I think this would be a bit of a surprise for people had you asked them where this campaign was going to go a month ago.
Interesting. So when you drill down into BC specific numbers, what are you seeing momentum wise for the three parties?
Well, and our national poll doesn't, because it's national, we don't have a large sample in British Columbia, so there is a margin of error here. But from what we've seen the last couple of weeks is, I would say the NDP is having the best campaign right now of the three main parties. The Conservatives are holding their own, but they're not. I would say that they're probably not altogether satisfied where they're at sort of in the province. They're probably competitive in a couple of those key areas, in the interior, in the north, but I suspect they would say lots of work to do in the greater Vancouver area. And the Liberals would be a little concerned. I think the Liberals certainly had big hopes and expectations in British Columbia going into this campaign as a place where they felt they could really pick up a lot of seats. At this stage of the game, I think they will feel that those seats aren't there for them, and that there's a lot of campaigning they need to do before September 20th.
You mentioned Greater Vancouver. We know heading into this election that the suburbs of Toronto and Vancouver will play a role in deciding who wins this time around. And you do break down the numbers. Leger breaks them down by suburban versus urban voters. Is there anything nationally you're seeing there that's interesting?
Yeah, in our national numbers, what we're seeing are the Liberals still maintain their lead and some of their dominance in the real urban metro centers across the country. So you'd be looking at Metro Toronto, Metro Montreal, and Vancouver. But the Liberals the NDP have made up some ground. So you're seeing a bit of a real kind of two-way battle in those real urban downtown areas of the big Canadian cities. In rural Canada, the Conservatives continue their lead, and in fact they've widened their advantage in rural Canada. And I think where we're seeing, and as you touched on it, Harold, where we're seeing some battles really will be in those suburban, outer rings of these big cities, suburban, I would say suburban, sort of lower mainland, the Surreys, the Burnabies, as well as I would say the, suburban Edmonton. You're going to see some real tight battles, and maybe potentially, Winnipeg and obviously the GTA. That is in flux, and those voters, I think it's competitive between the three parties. And I think that, to your point, the election will likely start to come down to who can win over the hearts and minds of those residents.
And where you've got three-way races, as we've seen at least until now in some of the suburbs or in parts of BC, it'll depend on vote splits, I guess, in some of those ridings and how they go on election day.
Absolutely, you're correct, and I mean, I think, there's probably two concerning trends right now for the Liberals in this. It would be the strength of the Conservatives, but also the strength of the NDP, because that combination can lead to, as you said, some really interesting vote splits in those especially in some of those suburban ridings, of the Lower Mainland and the GTA. And I think that'll be something that certainly something as pollsters will be watching, because it does. There's a certain point where suddenly that NDP vote in combination with that Conservative vote can lead to actually a fairly large number of Conservative seats.
The other thing Leger asked, which I always find interesting, is how likely people might be to change their vote before Election Day. And the NDP here appears to be less committed, the NDP voter, less committed at this point. What does that mean?
Well, and look, that's a trend that we've seen in the past. The NDP is a voter that tends to be a little less committed to their first ballot preference. 22% in our most recent Leger poll, 22% of NDP voters say they might switch. And again, when we talked about just earlier about that, those vote splits, that is obviously something that that comes increasingly into play as we get closer to voting day. The Liberals will want to present themselves well to be an attractive option to those progressive NDP voters potentially that might be on the move. Certainly the Conservatives are the most committed at this stage in terms of their vote probably not going anywhere, but it really is going to be that NDP and potentially Liberal. I mean, they could move to again if that campaign doesn't pick up steam and get on track a little bit better.
This sounds like a kind of a critical issue if we're talking here perhaps about strategic voting or the potential for strategic voting. And again, Leger asks a very direct question of people that if it came down to a choice between a Liberal candidate or a Conservative candidate in your riding, would you change your vote, and who would you vote for? And again, what did you learn anything there around how committed again people are, or where they might park their vote to keep the other guy out or get the other guy in?
Well, certainly, and this is a question that the pollsters started asking back in 2015 when you saw a lot of strategic voting with respect to Stephen Harper, and you saw actually an organization dedicated to helping people make strategic vote choices. We didn't see it as much in 2019, but we're cognizant of it a bit here in 2021. And I think the one thing with the Conservatives out front and some of this talk about a Conservative government for the first time, which many people thought was a bit of a long shot, that will get people thinking. We found when we asked decided voters who were not voting for Conservatives or Liberals, but they were voting for one of the other parties, we asked them, would the fact of a Conservative government prospect might change their vote? We found 1/4 of those voters, almost 24%, saying that they actually might change. They might vote strategically, and a large number of those voters would vote to vote Liberal, to support a Liberal government, or to support a Liberal candidate to try to prevent a Conservative government. And so that'll be something we're watching for, because those decisions can happen late in the campaign. They can be affected by late breaking issues, and certainly it's something that we'll be cognizant of to see if we can pick up any of that movement in our polling.
And will we notice it in the way the leaders are campaigning and the kind of messaging there?
You could very well, Harold. You could very well. Certainly, you could see the Liberals look to beef up their progressive credentials. Talk more about climate change, potentially on the Indigenous stuff. It is trickier for the Liberals to do that compared to 2015, because I think part of their struggle right now in this campaign is that their progressive credentials on those important issues for progressives, climate change, Indigenous reconciliation, electoral reform, even we haven't talked about that, but that was a big issue back in 2015 for voters. The Liberal record in the past 6 years isn't great on that in the eyes of some progressives. So they'll need to look at trying to make themselves more attractive, but it may be harder for them to do so than compared to 2015.
Then there's a question there about, again, asking over the last week whether your opinion of the leaders has changed positively or negatively or just neutral over the last week. Pretty big number for Trudeau, 41% of respondents saying that their opinion has dropped over the last week, 24% for O'Toole, 16% for Singh. Is that concerning if you're a Liberal?
Well, I think certainly it basically puts data to what we talked about anecdotally, a week ago, Harold, in the sense of the Liberals just didn't seem to get off on good solid footing on their campaign. Not that it was poor planning, as opposed to the unexpected. Afghanistan. I mean, they're dealing with protests, for example. These are things that distract the Liberal messaging, and therefore they're not saying what they want to be saying clearly enough to voters. And voters then are looking at these other issues and saying to themselves, this doesn't look good. These things don't look good on the Liberal government to some degree. Afghanistan. You could also be seeing potential reverberations of pandemic concerns that might be popping up again, and now we're bringing into question the whole, why are we having this election again? So I think there's a lot of secondary issues swirling around that Liberal campaign and around the leader, because that's what campaigns are really about. And on the other hand, O'Toole and Singh have had pretty good campaigns. They haven't had to deal with off-message issues as much. They've had clean, good visuals, and so I think you see the proof of that in our Leger polling.
And you also see, back to a dead heat, but we see a dead heat in the Leger poll when it comes to who would make the best leader. Like, all three are kind of in the 21 to 23% range. Not much to choose there.
No, and that's actually another question where we've seen some very significant movement, in particularly on the part of Erin O'Toole, the leader of the Conservatives. We polled on that. We asked that question in the early August, and we found 11% of our respondents said he would make the best PM, and he's doubled that. And now, I think you and I talked about this last week, Harold. Is that it's the one advantage that I think that Erin O'Toole might have in this campaign, is that he's not only delivering messages, but he's introducing himself to voters for many of them for the first time, and he's managed to do a good job of that, and that's reflected, I believe, in that best prime minister movement. Interesting.
Well, this was fascinating as always. We'll have you back hopefully soon to talk about maybe some issues we know that have come up, housing affordability, and other issues that are really resonating here in BC in recent days. So thanks, Andrew. Look forward to seeing you again.
Sounds great. Look forward to speaking again, Harold. Take care. Bye-bye.